This is a collection of stories from the summer 2021 Moxie Scholars, a group of 6 undergraduate students at UNC-Chapel Hill selected for the Carolina Women's Center Moxie Cohort. Each of us was partnered with a different gender equity organization in the Triangle this summer and attended weekly virtual Moxie sessions together on Fridays, featuring panels of leaders and advocacy spaces. Our group was led by Gloria Thomas, the director of the Carolina Women's Center, and Alexa DeFalco, a higher education administration master's student at NC State University. Each interview you're about to hear is between 2 scholars, and each pair came up with their own unique questions to ask one another. We hope you enjoy our stories and our visions for the future of gender equity.
Hi, my name is Cameron McDonald, and I'm a rising junior.
My name is Gloria Thomas, and I'm also a rising junior.
And over the summer, I was a Moxie Scholar, and I interned with Stand Up Speak Out.
This summer, I worked with Empowerment, Inc. All right, so today we're going to answer, what intersecting identities do you hold?
So I guess the most salient identities that I personally hold would be, of course, being a woman. And I also identify as being a member of the LGBTQ+ community, and being a first-generation college student has also impacted my experience here at UNC a lot. So that's an identity that I hold pretty close. What about you?
And for me, I am a Black woman. I'm also a first-generation college student, and I'm also a Nigerian American. I was not born there, but I am the daughter of immigrants from Nigeria.
That is such an important identity that I'm sure affects a lot, so thank you for sharing that. Why did you apply for the Moxie program?
So for me, I think it's so important to be surrounded by people who hold the ideals that you do, and I know Moxie, as a Carolina Women's Center program, everybody that they chose would be people that I could learn from, people who identify as feminists, and also the aspect of activism in Moxie was really important to me, to learn from people in the nonprofit world who do this as a living and who are activists for a living was a really important reason why I wanted to be a Moxie Scholar.
Yeah, I think you said that really well, Gloria. For me, something that really drew me to the program was the emphasis that was put on collaboration and just the value of having like-minded people work together for a common goal. And I think that really stood out in the program's mission statement, and it's been reflected in everyone that I've met and all of the speakers that have been featured throughout the semester. So that's really something that I value.
Right, Cameron. I'm really glad I can say the same, that I've seen that in the scholars and in the people that we've met this summer through Moxie. So our next question is, how has this past year morphed your perspective on feminism?
So for me personally, the pandemic has been pretty difficult, just mentally. Being isolated from the people who you kind of lean on the most was a really challenging part of it for me, especially with all of the things that have happened over the summer that has really been on the media kind of radar. I think that for me, that this just entire experience, COVID and all of the inequities that have kind of been brought to light in the recent months has just really reinforced to me that, 1, healthcare is incredibly important, and 2, that so many communities don't have access to the healthcare that they need. And so that's kind of an underlying and foundational goal that I have, is giving everybody access to the proper healthcare that they need. And so this kind of past year has really, really highlighted the lack of specifically access to reproductive health. In the Supreme Court and in the lower courts, a lot of really disappointing decisions have been made regarding women's reproductive rights, and I know communities of color suffer the most from that. So this year, that's been something that has really been brought to my attention. What about you?
Like you said, this pandemic has been very difficult for many people, so I think how my perspective has changed this year is just the importance of listening. I know there's just been so many disproportionalities and issues brought to light because of the pandemic, from women in situations of domestic violence being less likely to receive help, to Black women and trans women just being negatively affected and more likely to be in dangerous situations. So I think this past year has really taught me to listen to all stories and just really realize how important it is for listening to be the first step for any action to really come through. You have to know these stories, hear people out that have a different experience than yourself. And through this pandemic, we've all had very trying times, but to really make change and ensure that we aren't put in these situations again, it's important for everybody to listen, and that's something that I've really worked on this past year, and that's been important to me throughout this past year.
Yeah, I had an internship over the summer with the General Assembly as well, and I did a lot of constituent communication, and the part that you expressed about domestic violence, specifically for trans women of color and women of color in general, was definitely reflected in the messages that we were receiving. And I think that that's something that was a really oftentimes overlooked impact of the pandemic. So I'm glad that you brought that up.
That is so important. So our next question is, how have you seen activism and feminism overlap in nonprofit work?
You know, that's a super great question. I think that just my personal experience and what I've observed over the summer is that a lot of times women in activism work are the ones that are spearheading really important changes, really important missions, and really important actions are being taken by women. But so oftentimes their work isn't valued and it isn't considered to be important work by the general population. The women working in these fields are underpaid, overworked, and just spread so thin, and the work that they're doing is essentially for people other than themselves. And I think that kind of has just reflected women's general standing in society for a really long time. They do the most important work and get almost none of the credit for it. You can see this in like child rearing, and it's actual labor, it's actual work women produce when they raise children, but it's not looked at as such, and it's not rewarded in any way. And I think that I kind of have seen that mirrored a little bit in the nonprofit sector, with, you know, men being the ones that get paid the most, even though they do the least amount of work.
Yeah, Cameron, I could say that I had similar experience witnessing nonprofit work this summer. Empowerment, the group that I'm in, is led by 5 Black women at that. And it's just so reflective of how nonprofit work is today, really. Activism is women-led, nonprofit work is women-led. And sometimes in those spaces, you see women have to advocate for themselves along with the activism work and the nonprofit work that they're doing, which says a lot about the way that women are valued and treated in this society. Just like you said, people shouldn't have to advocate for themselves in their workplace. And in their line of work. And in nonprofit work, you do see that a lot, unfortunately. So that is one way I've seen activism and feminism overlap in nonprofit work.
I know that in my organization, it's spearheaded by Monica Day, and she's a woman that has an undeniable presence, and that's something that I've really admired watching her.
So our next question, what was your favorite takeaway from our Friday seminars this summer?
My favorite takeaway was our artivism lecture, and the nonprofit I work for really values art as a healing mechanism, and I personally really enjoy art, so that was just a very moving kind of lecture for me, and it helped me realize, you know, even if you're not good at art, there's still value in doing it. So
my favorite seminar this summer was to hear from women who work directly in nonprofit or feminist careers. I think it was just so inspiring to hear what they do in their line of work and how many lives they touch and how many people they get to help. And it was also really important to hear about how taxing that work can be and how it is okay to take care of yourself first sometimes, because in order to really be impactful in that line, you have to put yourself first, which is important, and surround yourself by people who understand your work and who can support you through it.
I think that was a very good key takeaway of you have to take care of yourself before you can take care of other people. I think women are expected to always put other people first, and kind of emphasizing that was something that really stuck out to me in that lecture too. So the last question that we have is, how do we each envision the future of gender equity? So do you want to start, Gloria?
Yeah, for me, I would say I envision all our radical perspectives just really coming to light and becoming the norm when it comes to gender equity. I envision men and people who don't identify as women being held accountable. Women and non-binary people and trans women have been the leaders of activism for decades. So I think it's important when we think about the future for they to also be our leaders. And as I said, listening is so important. So for them to be valued in society and for women to be held up, that's how I envision the future of gender equity.
Yes, I want the people who are responsible for these movements to be finally given their due, you know? That's something that's so important. And I liked what you said about, you know, our quote radical ideas just becoming like the norm, you know? Mm-hmm. Like women are equal to men, how radical. So for me, I think that something that I personally have had to deal with is kind of in a professional space, usually dominated by men. Feminine traits are looked down upon and they're seen as a weakness. I would love to see a future in which the unique perspectives and qualities that women can bring to collaborative spaces and to professional spaces just are valued as being an asset instead of something to hide or be ashamed of.
Just to start off, this is a conversation between myself, Ellie Alexander, and X Ramos Lara. I interned with the North Carolina Coalition Against Sexual Assault, known as NC-CASA, and X interned with the Pauli Murray Center. X, we were lucky enough to be able to hear from Barbara Lau, who serves as the executive director of the Pauli Murray Center during one of our Friday Moxie sessions this summer. For those who do not know about the life and legacy of Pauli Murray, could you talk a little bit about what you learned about them this summer?
I think the most crucial things that I learned about Pauli Murray were about their associations within feminist activist circles and within this, well, I would consider them to be like a pioneer of the civil rights movement, like doing the bus seat like refusal like actions like 15 years before like Rosa Parks did it, and also pioneering these classic works on Title like 7 and sex discrimination, and those were probably the biggest things I learned about them.
That's amazing. I actually didn't know about Pauli Murray before this summer, and I feel really lucky that we were able to learn so much. And the Moxie Scholars group was actually able to travel to the Pauli Murray house in Durham this past week as a group, which was Pauli Murray's child home, built in 1898 by her grandparents. The site was designated as a national treasure in 2015 and a National Historic Landmark in 2016. What was the experience like for you visiting this place in person for the first time?
In one word, it was shocking, oddly enough, because it was interesting to see just how much I could connect between the literature that I've read about them and seeing the house in person. One thing that they do is they require interns to read Pauli Murray's memoirs, and having to situate and position those books within an actual like historical and like geographical context is very interesting. And just seeing it in person was amazing. In short,
it sounds like you overall had a really impactful summer with the Pauli Murray Center. Could you tell me about your internship experience this summer and any projects that you had the chance to work on?
Yes. Well, my experience was very wonderful, as you clearly stated, and it was also tiring at the same time because of the work that I had to do, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. And the projects that I worked on were associated with categorizing a lot of the work that Pauli Murray produced and putting them into like folders and summarizing them and making them more accessible for people, especially the people who work at the center, and I did some community outreach with relevant organizations that shared the same like views and missions as the center did. And I think one of my favorite parts of working with the center was applying for a North Carolina civil rights trail marker.
Oh,
and
wow.
having the state recognize the center and the house itself as like a place of importance.
That is so cool. Lastly, what do you hope to be the future of gender equity?
This is a really big one. So this morning I was in my philosophical genders issues class, and in that class we had talked about this sense of separatism that a lot of second wave feminists had seeked out, in separating from hegemonic masculinity and the patriarchy that was actively oppressing them at the time. So almost immediately I want to say something like that, like a sort of separatism. Like that's what I would want gender equity to be. What, like, reframed in a way to it makes sense within like a gender like separatist movement almost. But then again, like separatism isn't always feasible and like a viable option. So I think instead of framing it within either like gender equity versus like gender separatist way of thinking, I would actually prefer the abolition of gender roles. That's where I would want everything to go. And I don't think that's necessarily like a separatist way of thinking, but just having to reframe people's thoughts and like society's views on what people of different genders can associate themselves with, and having to like decolonize their minds in a way.
I love that. Yeah. Wow.
We're going to switch it up and ask Ellie some questions now. To start off, could you tell me a bit about NC-CASA as an organization and what you learned from them this summer?
Yeah, so NC-CASA stands for the North Carolina Coalition Against Sexual Assault, and it is an inclusive statewide alliance working to end sexual violence through education, advocacy, and legislation. And I learned so much from them this summer. It's honestly hard to pinpoint like one overall takeaway, but in the beginning when I was doing a bunch of trainings, one training in particular called Upstream Same River really stuck with me. And it talked about the intersections between systems of oppression in the United States and how there is a history of sexual violence that's intertwined with racism, but also the systems that we use to respond to that violence is intertwined with racism, which makes it difficult to ease or prevent harm. And just thinking about the root of violence and how systems of oppression interact with each other is something, I mean, specifically related to sexual violence, is something that I just hadn't even considered before, and it honestly blew my mind. So I'll say thank you, NC-CASA, for teaching me that really big lesson this summer.
Thank you. It sounds like NC-CASA is doing some truly incredible work. What were you able to accomplish with them this summer?
You know, Chris, my supervisor, said, you get to do an independent project and we'll be working on it together the entire way, which was an incredibly supportive approach that I really appreciated. And I decided I wanted to create a toolkit, which we just finalized this past week, and it is called Campus Culture Change Through Horticulture, a holistic approach to sexual violence prevention and response. And it is essentially a toolkit talking about horticulture therapy and how horticulture-based interventions can address sexual violence on college campuses. And it suggests creating a survivor-based group and also a primary prevention group. So we have activities that these groups can use, and how if you want to implement this kind of program, you can work with campus organizers and community partners, and did a whole bunch of literature review for this as well, which is the fun part of creating a toolkit. That was my main project this summer, and I really loved it.
That sounds like such amazing work. What inspired that project and your interest in working with NC-CASA as a whole?
Yeah, so when I actually applied for Moxie Scholars, I wrote about wanting to be partnered with NC-CASA because I've been following them for a few years now and seen some of their trainings and the great work that they do across the state. And I really wanted to just dive a little bit deeper into how I could use my leadership positions at UNC to address sexual violence. And for this specific project, I was inspired by working on a farm in Chapel Hill through an Apples course that I took at UNC this semester, and kind of realizing my own healing journey while being on that farm and going, this is something that I would really love to implement. And having NC-CASA be so receptive to that idea was really amazing. I think something that's challenging when you're working with with honestly any social justice organization is that sometimes what you're producing is just going out to people who are already interested in that topic, or already educated on it and are going to be receptive. So it's hard to know like if you're actually creating meaningful change or if you're, you know, sending more resources into an echo chamber. So moving forward, what I would like to do with this toolkit is making sure it's getting everywhere that it absolutely can go once it's published, and putting it in the hands of folks who might not be in those typical sexual violence prevention circles, who already are exposed to an abundance of resources.
And lastly, I would like to ask you the same question you ended the first segment with. What do you hope to be the future of gender equity?
I really liked your answer about abolitionism. I think that's really important. If we could get rid of gender norms in general, or like, I don't know, gender as a whole, that would be great. In the United States right now, I think a reckoning is happening where people are actually thinking about the foundation of this country and why systems of oppression overlap with each other. And that's because the people who set up these systems are the people who have been benefiting. The systems are doing exactly what they were set up to be doing. So I guess my vision and hope for the future of gender equity is that we can abolish all oppressive systems, not only in this country, but across the world, so that racism, sexism, homophobia, all these things that are prevalent can kind of be addressed in one clean swoop. That is my dream.
Thank you for responding to my questions with such poignance. I think that's the word.
Of course. Thanks for taking the time to interview me. This was fun. Let's do it again.
Hello, this is Olivia from Moxie 2021 Cohort. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am a Women in Gender Studies and Political Science double major at UNC, a senior this year. Crazy.
Hi everyone, I'm Megan, also Moxie 2021 Cohort. Thanks so much for listening to our podcast today. I'm a rising senior at UNC too, and majoring in history and peace, war, and defense with plans to go into the public interest legal field.
Oh my goodness, look at you go. She even said her plans. Well, Megan, what have you been doing this summer with Moxie?
I've been interning with Action NC, which is a grassroots advocacy organization, and specifically within their initiative called RAGE, which is Race and Gender Equity. So I've been meeting with a team of amazing women every week, planning for our social media narrative, looking into different policy initiatives within the state, and just discussing various issues related to race and gender equity and how we can better convey those initiatives to the constituents of the state and the members of the organization. So it's been a really amazing experience that's taught me so much about the various issues and challenges within the state and how we can best address them, specifically regarding women and minorities in the state. So yeah, what have you been working on, Olivia?
Okay, oh my goodness, wow, that like took my breath away. I hate that I'm following that. I've been working with Equality NC, amazing organization, North Carolina's longest running LGBTQ plus activist organization, which is pretty rad. And I've been working with their civic and outreach department this summer, or like little team this summer. And we've been creating a list of LGBTQ plus supportive / owned organizations that are across North Carolina that will hopefully be put into a website soon. And so that wherever you go in North Carolina, you have access to a list of places that are safe spaces. And oh my gosh, I love it so much. It's been really cool because now I'm starting to reach out to the businesses and like doing the double check and like real time, hey, like how do you feel about these things, like, and trying to figure out what is a safe space based on what people have said and what's not. It's a really interesting conversation to navigate. I've learned a lot. I don't know about you, but I entered Moxie just like really hoping to gain some motivation about like, okay, what do I want to do in life? Like I have all of these things that I've been interested in and like pursuing it academically, but what's after that? And I was like in my interview, I talked to Gloria and I was really discussing just how much I wanted to be inspired by the people that I worked with to like figure out what it is that I want to do. And I have realized that I really was inspired by the people that I worked with, but just in a totally different way than I expected. The motivation that I found isn't to be like, okay, this is exactly what I'm gonna do. I know it now. And like, that's it. Yay, woohoo. I got a direction. I've just like been really inspired to find what it is that actually makes me happy. Like I feel like that's such a cheesy thing to say, but I've never seen a group of people be so deeply passionate and happy to be with each other and working together about what they're doing. Like it just seems like they all really love the work that they're a part of, and that it's, or at least it's like a very like really fulfilling space to be. And so like that's what I want to find. And now I don't have the goal of a job, but I have the goal of like figuring out what it is that I want, and that's been so cool.
And that's ultimately a way more rewarding goal to have than just on one like specific job.
Exactly. We love it. What about you? What's been like any epiphanies this summer?
It totally has given me insight into like the whole nonprofit and advocacy space, because I've never really done an internship like this, let alone like basically meeting a bunch of people who are very like-minded, but who also have diversity of opinions and backgrounds, like all of you, and meeting every week and discussing all these issues has given me a lot of insight that I never knew that I wanted, honestly, into so many of these issues. So I think it's along this like similar lines, has given me a lot of new opinions and information about what I may want to do in a career path, and finding something that truly makes me happy. Because when you see all these people in nonprofit spaces who come to work every day despite all of the challenges and just love what they do and feel so passionate for the causes that they're working towards, it's really inspiring, and it's taught me so much. So totally agreed with everything you said.
That's so beautiful.
And regarding those safe spaces you were talking about, how do you, once you have the list of them, how do you convey those to LGBTQ people around the area?
Yeah, the distribution part is a step after me. I think that the plan is to make a website where it's all in one place, and it'll be a part of like the Equality North Carolina website. I honestly don't know what steps they're going to take to publicize it, because I know that there's like that flip side of like, what does publicizing all of these LGBTQ plus safe spaces do for people who don't want these individuals to have safe spaces. So that's going to be a really interesting line to walk. And I'm really looking forward to being still a part of the team and like watching that unfold. Hopefully I'm hoping that these summer connections are ones that last like honestly throughout the school year and on.
Yeah.
I've already committed myself to like fall to fall activities. So I'm in it for the long haul.
Right. Yeah. That's great.
I wanted to ask you, okay, dream world. Tomorrow you wake up. Gender equity is first thing on the mind, first thing on the agenda. What does that look like? Like, what does your dream gender equity world look like when you wake up in the day?
I would say just no binaries and just no constraints that people have to live by according to gender norms that were established hundreds of years ago. Overall, a more accepting and equitable world that would be created by getting rid of these binaries and constraints. And it's something that I feel that all of our organizations in their own ways are working towards independently, and maybe even some collaboratively. But it's something that, I think 50 years ago may not have even been on the horizon. But now I really feel that just looking at a lot of the things that are going on our campus and in the world and in the state, North Carolina is what I always viewed as such a conservative state. And going to UNC, I was like, oh my gosh, is everyone going to be so conservative? But really, there are people who are fighting for this every day, even in states where you maybe never even thought that there would be. So I feel like it's not even that far off, hopefully. But yeah, overall, I would say my view of this perfect world would just be getting rid of the binaries and getting rid of this black and white and hot and cold sort of environment where people are constrained by what gender they maybe look like or were born into or have been taught that they are, and just the ability to choose how they want to live their lives independent of other people's thoughts and judgments.
Oh my goodness.
So,
I felt that so much in my soul. Thank you so much for saying that.
Oh yeah, I'm so glad. Tell me about your view. It's the same, just elaborate.
Oh my gosh, that's so, the getting rid of binaries, I think that's something that I just actively, I've learned about these things for so long now that I'm living it and really recognizing, I don't see this on a spectrum. I don't see these things as fluid, and just really starting to see where that is in life. And it's wow, I really thought I was on it, and here we are. But it's just that it's getting away from this idea of right and wrong, because the person who told you what was right and what was wrong has a skewed perception of the world. I don't know. I think that, do you hear what I'm trying to say?
Totally, yeah.
Okay, great. These Western binaries.
I know, literally screw these Western binaries.
Screw the Western binaries. That's the new name of the podcast.
I know, I would be so down for that new name.
It has been such a blessing listening to what you have to say. And
same for you, likewise. And just learning from all of the Moxies, people I never would have met.
Yeah.
We knew each other before, which is great.
I know, I was so excited.
It's been great.
Yeah, I look forward to how these relationships will grow, because I know that they will continue, because we will see each other all the time.
We will, I know. And I would love to meet up with Gloria too, because she's just
the
greatest and sweetest person ever, and it wouldn't be possible without her. So,
well, thank you. Shout out to Gloria, shout out to the Moxies, and shout out to all of the amazing
and Alexa.
Yes, Alexa. Oh my gosh, we have such an amazing team. And shout out to all of the amazing nonprofits that we got to work with. Thank you for housing us for the summer. Thank you so much
for the opportunity.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you, Megan.
All right. Thank you, Olivia.
The 2021 Moxie Cohort included Ellie Alexander, Cameron McDonald, Gloria Ogunlade, Megan Prabhu, X Ramos Lara, and Olivia Sullivan. To the next generation of Moxies, we cannot wait to see you shine and change the world for the better. To our site supervisors, the organizations we are partnered with, the supporters of the Carolina Women's Center, and our program leaders, Dr. Thomas and Alexa, thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.